Hello, everyone, and welcome to the FinTech Festival in Canada. I'm here with my colleagues from the Future of Work and Learning Coalition in Waterloo region. We're really looking forward to spending some time together today, answering some of your most critical questions as it relates to the future of work, the work we embarked on together, and how we've readied our region for the future of work and learning. With me today are Dr. Norah McRae, Assistant Provost, Cooperative and Experiential Education at the University of Waterloo. Simon Chan, VP Talent, Academy and Future of Work at Communitech, and he just so happens to be my co-lead in the coalition in Waterloo region. And last, but certainly not least, Stephen Harrington, Deloitte's National Leader for Workforce Strategy and the Future of Work Advisory. Before we get to our panel, we're going to ask Simon to take just a moment to share a brief overview of our approach and our initial findings. Simon.
Thank you, Kathryn, for your introductions. I'm going to spend a few minutes to set the stage and provide some background on our future of work and learning journey and how we came together as a collective group. At Communitech, which is an innovation hub in Waterloo region, we work with a diverse group of organizations across the innovation ecosystem. These include startup companies, global enterprise organizations, academia, and public and private sectors. In late 2018, we had discussions with a number of these organizations about what were some of the challenges in continuing to keep pace with the rapid changes in technology and innovation in digital. In talent attraction, skills development, and the changing nature of work were topics that bubbled up to the surface, the future of work. A number of the organizations we talked to were just starting to think about how they might tackle some of these challenges. However, there's a few organizations that were already starting to lead the charge, and those organizations are the ones today on the panel, Manulife, Deloitte, and the University of Waterloo. We realized early on in our discussions that the future of work and learning was a system-wide challenge, not one that any one organization could solve for on its own. So we decided to take a collective approach. So on January 29th, 2019, we hosted our very first Future of Work and Learning community event, where we brought together leaders from across the business sector, and academia and private and public sector to talk about what is the future of work and why should you care. Now, interestingly enough, that day, it was a huge snowstorm, very Canadian, and our keynote speaker, David Mallon from Deloitte, was snowed in Minneapolis. So we decided that he would deliver his keynote address via video. So if you can look there's some video screens. And I remember thinking at the time, that was just really, really odd to have a conference or a keynote done by video. So looking back, I guess that was very just 2019. Even though it was a snow event that day, we still had over 125 community and business leaders attend the event. And we knew that day that this topic was something that our ecosystem would want to explore further. So throughout 2019, we held a variety of workshops with organizations so they could learn more about the trends that were impacting the workplace and also hear from the workforce and talent itself on their perspectives of work and how it was changing. In November, we decided to form a coalition of partners who agreed to pilot working together for a year to tackle some of the common challenges we identified around the future of work. When we thought we would have over a couple of years to be able to tackle becoming future ready and preparing our workforce for workplace and workforce trends, but COVID hit us. And I can still remember driving down the 401 on March 12th to a community event in Windsor where we planned to share our coalition approach with their community leaders at their request. It was on that drive down that I heard that the cancellation of the MBA, Tom Hanks had contracted COVID, and many businesses were moving to remote. And that is when I realized the future of work was going to become the present of work. Now that you have a little bit of history and background, I'm going to provide a bit of an overview of the coalition and our collaborative approach before we get into the panel discussion. So as I mentioned, the Future of Work and Learning Coalition was formed in November, and the partners come from across academia, private and public sector. So these include Waterloo Region's municipalities, Workforce Planning Board, Chamber of Commerce, university and colleges, and a spectrum of startup to large enterprise organizations. Our challenge for the future of work we identified was one that was very complex and one that no one single stakeholder could solve for on their own. And our goal was to really build healthier workplaces and more resilient communities so that we could propel our community forward. So the coalition approach was inspired by Stanford's collective impact model, where a group of organizations come together, rally around a common agenda or set of priorities, supported by a backbone organization, in this case, Communitech, which is a not-for-profit, to help coordinate the group's efforts. The focus of the collaborative model is to build mutually reinforcing activities around those common priorities, align on some shared themes and metrics, and ensure that there's continuous communication across these various partners. So as part of our early research process in 2019, we complemented a lot of the secondary research that we were doing with some primary research through individual interviews and several community-based design thinking workshops to help our leaders understand the goals, the motivations, career paths, and pain points across various personas that were being impacted around the future of work. And some of those personas that we looked at were early career, mid to late career, freelancers, and the participants came from across private sector, public sector, and manufacturing, as we have a large manufacturing presence in Waterloo region. These workshops helped our coalition partners align on some common priorities, which include how we might promote work integrated learning, so more co-op, apprenticeships, and internship programs. How do we help workers mid-career with continuous learning, reskilling, and upskilling? And how do we help employers understand the changing expectation of their worker or the workforce, particularly the early career? And we began digging into the topic of gig and freelance workers. And most recently, due to COVID-19, our organizations are working together to look at how we might redesign leadership and workplace practices to adapt to a remote and hybrid work environment. So to close, here are the goals and objectives of our coalition. Well, the first thing we wanted to do is work together to create a playbook for how other ecosystems and communities could collaborate. And we've shared some of this knowledge with communities like Halifax and Windsor. And the idea is to build a network of networks, communities of practice across Canada. We also wanted to run some active pilots and act as a bit of a petri dish for some of these future of work initiatives. And we agreed that it would be important to open source these learnings so that we can share them across our coalition and community. And we wanted to help champion the conversation around how we can make Canada future ready, which is one of the reasons why we were so excited to be asked to be part of this virtual talent summit as part of the FinTech Summit. So now that we have a bit of background, I'm going to turn it back over to Kathryn to moderate our panel discussion.
Fantastic. Thanks, Simon. Before we get started into the trends and what our coalition has been up to, I'm going to ask each of our panelists to share a little bit about their role and how it connects to the future of work and learning. Stephen, I'll start with you.
Sure, thanks. So, I've been working on the future of work file since 2011, believe it or not. We wrote our first position paper back then, way before it was cool. But my job ostensibly is to think about the future on behalf of the Canadian member firm. And I'll let you all in on a little secret. The reason that I do that is because in order to set a workforce strategy, we need to think about the future. It's that simple. Unfortunately for many of us, including our own firm, it's a lot easier to think about next week or next quarter. But when we cast our minds into 3 to 5 year timeframes, then really interesting options start to emerge. That had been why it was important to me up until, around February, March this year. I'm already trying to get into 2021. So that obviously has changed things significantly. Now it's become a strategic imperative for everyone.
Amazing. Thanks, Stephen. Norah.
Thanks very much, Katie. As mentioned, I'm the Associate Provost for the Cooperative and Experiential Education Program at the University of Waterloo. And in a nutshell, my program connects students at the University of Waterloo to the world of work. And we do that a number of ways, through our world-renowned co-op program, where students are actually working in industry while they're doing their degrees, and our career programming as well. So my role, very much in the way that Stephen has articulated it, is to think about, if we are connecting our students to the world of work, what do our students need? What skills do they need? What capabilities do they need? How can they best navigate a future workplace? And so being engaged in this Future of Work Coalition was very much from the position of early talent and young talent, and how to help that talent get into the future of work successfully.
Wow, I think we're in for a really exciting panel, folks. I'm going to head over to Simon to talk about Communitech and his role there.
Thanks, Katie. So how we got involved in the future of work, as I mentioned, was we support organizations of all sizes, startup organizations, scaling organizations, and large enterprise organizations with their innovation efforts. And obviously, a big part of that comes down to how do we actually ensure that we have we attract the talent, and we ensure that to need to grow our ecosystem, so our organizations, as well as ensure that those who are working in these organizations continue to keep pace from a skills development standpoint. And so that's really our focus is really around it's really about building ecosystems and ensuring that the companies across our ecosystem in Waterloo region, but across Canada, because I think our nation is a bit too small to not collaborate. We thought this was a really interesting idea to bring together a group and experiment on how we might do this together. And to our knowledge, we're the first community in Canada that's actually taking this on, so it's a pretty exciting opportunity.
It's certainly been a pretty incredible opportunity to be a part of. I'm going to head into trends. I'm really curious to hear your perspectives on the future of work. Everyone is talking about the pace of change and digitization, but what do you think is not getting enough airtime that needs to be discussed? Norah, I'll start with you.
Thanks very much for the question. Well, of course, and from my perspective, as I introduced, what I don't think is getting enough attention and we should be thinking about is as we are in a remote work environment, and likely to continue much more so than we were pre-COVID, when COVID is behind us, we need to think about what does that mean for young talent? How do we recruit young talent in this way? How do we onboard them? How do we make them feel part of a team? How do we help them become productive members of teams quickly? And it's a very different way of thinking about things, where in the past you might have, company lunches or meetings, or they get to meet with various people in the hallway, all that kind of stuff. We know that that's different. And so I think organizations are a little bit reticent, or could be, around thinking about how they can bring young talent in, because they're not quite sure how to navigate this space. And I think that's an area that we need to think about, because we cannot let that talent pipeline dry up.
That's a great point. Stephen.
Yeah, a trend, Katie, I'm quite passionate about, and we were really warming up on before COVID that got a little sidetracked, is looking more closely at the contingent workforce in Canada and globally. So here I'm thinking very broadly about people who are in, some forms of part-time work, contract work, but of course the growing gig economy, platform work. You think of Uber, but you might also think of Top Coder and Freelancer and Amazon Turk. There's just this proliferation of opportunities for people to do this sort of digital labor market attachment. And it was really interesting to watch here in Canada that when we made a move to protect Canadians, the Canadian government was very careful to make sure that those protections extended to people in those types of work, because they recognized that employment market had grown so large that it would have created a real risk for social welfare in Canada if those folks hadn't been included. But what we really need is a strategy for how to make that kind of employment market work for everyone. So there's a bunch of policy changes that really need to protect those types of workers. But I don't think we can put the horses back in the barn, as some would wish to. We need to actually look at how we grow that digital labor market attachment economy for the good of Canadians. And I think it's a big global issue as well.
Mm-hmm. It's really interesting. I think we're almost at the precipice of being able to design our own future for the future workforce, be it young talent or talent that looks different than what we would have expected before. Simon, I know you and I have done a whole bunch of research in terms of what does this future of work and learning actually mean. We know a lot of organizations and academic institutions are trying to find a particular slice of it. When you've looked at the entire remit of research out there, what do you think it actually means?
Yeah, so I think the future of work is, especially post-COVID, it's just a buzzword at this point in time, right? People are using it and trying to stuff everything under the sun under future of work as a way to talk about it. But when we've done, some of our research, as well as some of the actual literature review research that the University of Waterloo has helped us do in some of the work we've been looking at, I think about it in kind of three buckets and three areas that are changing or being disrupted. So the first one is really around workforce and talent. So the workforce itself, we see changing expectations of work. To Stephen's point, thinking about contingent workforce as an opportunity wasn't something many people thought about, 10 or 20 years ago. Career paths are no longer linear career paths that we're accustomed to. There is much more transitions between different phases of life, as well as different careers. as well as the rise of voice and choice when it comes to top talent. Top talent today has a lot more choice than they ever did before because they have a lot more transparency into organizations, and they have the opportunity to connect globally that they never did before. So the first is really the disruption of what's happening in the talent landscape. The second one I would say is that we see a cluster around is what's happening in the workplace, the organizations themselves. And I think of them in kind of like three subcategories, if you will. So the first one is just the space itself, the physical workspace, virtual hybrid now being adopted at large scale. What does that mean for, we have more and more distributed teams and network teams. So the place itself has changed for the workplace. The second thing would be technology, adoption of AI and data, more collaboration tools. We were just talking about that before we came on stage here around the proliferation of conference and collaboration tools that are going to emerge as a result of this work environment. And then culture, a real emphasis now more on diversity, equity, and inclusion, a real openness to a different work environment, flexible work arrangements. So those are the first two things. And the last one that I think that we always talk about future of work, we add the learning part of it, is I think learning is being disrupted. Because if you think about what's happening with all these changes to the workforce and the workplace, the one and done degree and diploma early in your career, that's no longer valid. We need to think much more about continuous learning and lifelong learning so that we're continuing to keep pace with all the change that surrounds us. So when we kind of knit that all together, I think about it as, the relationship between the workforce and the workplace is becoming much more ambiguous. And we as a nation, or we as communities, need to find ways to build the infrastructure, build the mindset of continuous learning and adaptability and resilience to be able to navigate all these changes that's happening to the workforce and the workplace. So that's kind of how I break down the future of work and learning. Would love to hear, if there's any additional thoughts from my colleagues.
Yeah, I mean, so it's funny, when I think about the kind of work we're doing with clients, I'm lucky enough to be part of a global team of folks that think about this and do work that makes direct impact on clients. You won't be surprised that, I kind of think of the future of work as in three ways right now. Ways of working are changing, future skills are changing. And then the one that maybe gets a little less airtime is the ReArchitecture of Work. We have some clients that are really starting to think about how they can change the work itself. We've had this long-standing habit in the industrialized world to start with big, expensive technologies that we presume will add productivity. Then we figure out how we're going to wring value out of them for a decade or more, and it becomes a sort of transformation and change exercise. We're not saying that that's necessarily a bad thing and that's going to continue, but we want to start to work the problem from the other side. Think first about what is the job? What could it be if we got the dull, dangerous, and expensive tasks out of the work? We got people closer to clients and customers and citizens. And the really exciting thing about that is if we do it and then we work that problem backwards to get the right process and technology to support the work, we can create more human jobs, more interesting jobs, more engaging jobs, less drudgery, less danger. That's actually that's a good for all. We just have to figure out how to do it in a way that maintains healthy employment as we move forward.
Really great points. Thank you all. It's actually really quite inspiring about what can be, both from a workplace perspective and a worker perspective. That's really interesting. Stephen, I'm going to ask you to stay with me for this next question because I'm really curious on your thoughts here. What are you seeing people focus on in the near term? And I think you may have just foreshadowed the second part of my question, but what do you think is still on the horizon?
Well, if I had to add to that work architecture piece, I'm not. So let me say something about ways of working first. I think one of the most dangerous things that we're doing is we're all assuming that the new normal will be a hybrid normal, that more people will have the opportunity to work where they want to, when they want to. Maybe, but I can tell you from doing the work on the ground with clients that are getting prepared for that, there's a lot to figure out. The moment it's not, required, it's currently required. People are locked in their houses. I think that at scale, especially large employers, will have a challenge where the middle manager who's been actually just keeping it together with duct tape and glue will want to go back to that workplace as soon as they possibly can. There are HR policy, technology, and real estate considerations that are quite substantial if we really want to sustain new ways of working. And we have to think about new ways of working for people who can't do remote work. There really should be something for everyone. And that takes a lot of design thinking to figure out. But the other thing I just want to pile on Simon's point about future skills. One of the things we're doing with clients is really trying to start to apply analytics to figure out what skills people actually need in the future, exactly who needs to learn them, right? And by when, and what are our build, buy, borrow strategies? Because that whole space has been led too much by top 10 lists, if I'm going to be frank, of here are the future skills, and I don't know who needs them exactly or how it's going to apply to work. We have to actually tie those things together and get quite planful, to make up a word, about how future skills are going to get applied.
It's really interesting. So when I listen to the three of you talk, there's a running theme that I hear throughout all of it, sort of complex systems analysis, where it's not just one that's going to be a driver of everything else. And I also hear design thinking, Stephen, as you mentioned, but I also hear a lot of empathy. Let's be human together, and let's really come together as a community for the benefit of everybody, which I think is a different conversation than that which we might have had perhaps 5-10 years ago. Norah, I'm going to switch us over to learning a little bit. And you are at the ground zero of developing future talent that's both really highly adaptable and resilient. And I know you've worked a lot to really invest in this talent. What structures or experiences can we build into higher education to future-proof the global workforce?
Thanks, Katie. Yeah, at the University of Waterloo, we have the world's largest co-op program, which is a program where students study full-time, and then they work in full-time paid work experiences in last year in 62 different countries, over 21,000 of these experiences that not only generated salary for students, which helped finance their education, but also created tremendous value. Deloitte did a fabulous research study for us last year and determined that for every $2 that were spent on student salaries, for every dollar that was spent on student salaries, the companies benefited $2 in value add from the contributions of that talent in their workplaces during these 4-month co-op work terms. So that is one strategy. Universities, higher educational institutions can and perhaps should explore how to integrate work-integrated learning programs, and there are a range of them, co-op is one type, into their academic programming to better connect students and their ability to apply their learning in workplace settings. So that is a key strategy that can be adopted. But it's not enough just to do that. I think that has to be done in a quality way, and there's lots of discussion around that, but it also has to be with an eye to for what end. And when we're thinking of the future of work, this comes back to the point about future skills. So we've also done extensive research at the University of Waterloo about what are those future skills, and to Stephen's point, in general terms, what are they that we need to be preparing our students for, and have developed the Future Ready Talent Framework, which we're now circling our programming around to prepare students to develop those capabilities and then develop them when they're on workplaces and really be thinking about them as they get ready to graduate. So that's another strategy. It's identifying the learning outcomes that are important. And then further to Stephen's point, because we have such a large program and the largest in the world, we have a very large database of job postings. So my team last year did an analysis of 9,600 job postings that have been posted by employers. And we're talking about employers who want to hire young talent over the last few years. And we can now break that down by faculty, by discipline, by year. And so now we're starting to really hone in on, okay, if you're a student looking for your first work experience and you're from the Faculty of Math, for example, this is what employers have been hiring for, and this is the skill set they're looking for that group. So it's using analytics to get much more specific, and then how then, and this is my final point, how can we add extra training for those students? They're already part of, let's use the Faculty of Math, one of the world's best Faculty of Maths that exists, and one of the largest actually. And they have a fabulous academic program, but there might be some additional skills training that we can offer. And this is part of that lifelong learning point that Simon brought in. It doesn't just start when you're 65 and looking for something to do. It starts early on, and that mindset about always thinking, and it's part of human-centered design thinking, I suppose, one's own, Where am I at? Where do I want to go? How do I get there? And all the tools that I need to put in my kit bag in order to get there. So we've also started to develop what we're calling upskilling of our own student body by adding these small badge-worthy, micro-credential-worthy skill sets that are honed to meet the needs of our students where they're at and where they're wanting to go, and ultimately to meet the needs of industry and employers, because they're our client as well.
That's fascinating. It's some incredible work that you're doing to advance students and workplaces. It's absolutely incredible. Today, so many companies are racing to introduce digital models to their organizations. And as we said, COVID has sort of sped this up a little bit. But what else can be done from an organizational perspective to speed up the innovation and the quality of it? Stephen, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I keep coming back to skills, but it's funny because I think we've gone through a period where digital was largely about technology, where we were really trying to educate people within organizations, like what is blockchain. Would be, we'd run them through that and we'd say, oh, good, we're taking a step towards digital, or here are a bunch of tools that we can bring in. It's still important because that ecosystem just keeps changing at an incredible pace. So you actually need people who have the skill to do that external scanning, spot the sometimes low-cost opportunities, and build that digital architecture. So I don't want to dismiss that. That's important. But I think the rest of it, again, is about humans. It's about building skills at scale, digital literacy, sort of level 1 for everyone, so nobody's left out. But also structure. There's a great thinker in our network out of the US, John Hagel, who says one of the best ways to build a learning organization is to build mission-based teams. So imagine a structure where most people are in these teams. They get pulled out of their silos. They're given a clear mission. Very importantly, the dull and transactional work is removed from them, and they're multidisciplinary. And his point is that if a group like that goes and tackles a big problem or goes looking for problems, they will learn faster from each other than any course could teach them. So that's sort of that structure, that mindset of being agile and being flexible and fungible, I think is really core to digital success as well.
Amazing. Simon?
Yeah, I think, building on what Stephen said, it's really around like the learning piece and identifying how we can actually create longer sets of learning. We need to change how we think about education in terms of, it's a point in time. They're long courses or long programs. Those are still required, but how do we actually take some of those and provide shorter bursts of learning that we can actually allow people, as they learn through their lifetime, to be able to have incremental learning, to develop those skills in the timeliness of work. One of the things that our group, our coalition, has talked a lot about is we all identify the same need, but how do we get industry and how do we get the academic institutions as well to work together to figure out what's the right model? How do we actually create that flywheel for us to all work together to be able to continue to provide the infrastructure required for us to continue that skills development journey for Canada and for our community?
Thank you. Norah, any thoughts from you on this question?
Well, I think examples like the coalition that has been formed in the Waterloo region is an example of how some of that can happen. Because in the past, there have been many different kinds of roundtables where industry talks to the academic leaders and then they go back and forth. But it's very difficult to penetrate actual curriculum development because of the way that works. But if the sense of an ecosystem can be developed within a region, and there's more exposure to each other in a regular, meaningful way, and around, for example, some of the projects, Simon, that you've mentioned that the coalition has done, then that starts to create a different approach to how this can happen. And it becomes much more one that does look at this question of skill development from a multifaceted approach, allows for more intervention or collisions or whatever that might be, and for people to be able to see the benefits to themselves and others by making some of these changes that are really important. And so I think we all know that there needs to be an ongoing development of skills and training and education. That's we're never done and dusted. It carries on. But I think the way that we have those conversations is changing and needs to change for that to happen evolve in an even faster way.
Thank you. There's a really interesting theme starting to emerge too in terms of building human-centric skills through experiences together, micro-credentialing, as well as those baseline technical skills. So Stephen, as you said, no one gets left behind. That's quite important. It's a really interesting theme that's starting to come out in your answers. Norah, I'm going to start with, you landed on the coalition and started to talk about some of the work we're doing there. So that's where I'm going to start to take the conversation now. Simon, what projects and initiatives is the coalition working on? I know you've talked about a couple, but I wonder if you want to go just a little bit deeper in them.
Yeah, sure. So one of the things that we started off with was really around bringing the diverse group of knowledge to the table. So we've got 19 different organizations from across various sectors who all work in some way, shape, or form around tackling the future of work. And really, awareness and education is paramount and important just to start the conversation and build momentum. COVID obviously helped a lot with that, but you know, we started off by started off with physical events, in-person events, which shifted to virtual events on a monthly basis, really around how is COVID accelerating various aspects of the future of work. And many of the folks on this panel have been participants in that, to really drive a better understanding of what is the future of work. So one is just the regular conversation around the various topics and digging a bit deeper so that we can educate folks. And we've been really fortunate to have up to 700, 800 registrants per session that we've been running. The second thing I would say is when we started talking about the future of work, one of the questions all the coalition members asked was, well, how do we know whether a community is future ready or not? Like, what are the domains within the future of work, right? It's such an abstract concept that we talked about. So in our conversations, we talked about, well, is there a way for us to start creating some sort of measurement, some sort of scorecard that would help a community assess how they're doing and create a better understanding? So the University of Waterloo has been helping us lead this project and really has created a scorecard, or is in the process of creating a scorecard that helps us understand what are the domains within the future of work. So for a community, some of the domains are the ones we've talked about here, which is, the changing dynamics of work, continuous learning, but the other piece is economic development and the metrics we need to look at from an economic development standpoint. So it's a combination of looking at how mature a community is, assessing how mature a community is across those various topics, trying to start identifying what are some of the metrics we can use to measure progress and understand where we are. And so I think this is going to be a really interesting tool that communities can use to generate a conversation about how future ready they are. And then over time, what we'd love to see is that that type of a scorecard be adopted by other communities so that we can share back and forth. We might be strong, in a particular area in our region, but would love to work with another region who, and share those practices and vice versa. So that's one other project that we're working on. A couple of quick ones to highlight as well is, we talked a lot about skills. Well, we kicked off a project around mid-career reskilling and upskilling, and looking at can we take university level programming like MBA programming and condense it down into shorter bursts of learning while working with employers to actively get feedback around the efficacy of some of those training. So we've been working with Wilfrid Laurier University on that particular project, along with our coalition members who have sponsored employees to go through the programming. And it's really kind of that early pathway into the things that Norah referenced around micro-credentialing and recognition of those shorter bursts of learning. And this was actually a project that was funded by the province of Ontario through their Ministry of Labour, Training and Skills Development through the Skills Catalyst Fund. So that's another project. And the last one that we're just embarking on right now is many of our organizations are all struggling with what we've talked about around shift to remote and hybrid work. And what I would contend is, early in March, most organizations just kind of lifted and shifted their leadership practices or their processes from an analog world to a digital world without really redesigning them. And so the coalition groups have all kind of got together and said, what if we could experiment together around various interventions, whether it be leadership practices or processes changes, to actually get some data-driven learnings around what interventions might work as we look to redesign remote and hybrid work. So we're using a common measurement framework. We're going to agree on a common set of interventions that we'll run, and the idea is that we'll actually share across our organizations throughout that 6-month sprint around what are some of the learnings that we have. And again, through the spirit of kind of open sourcing, we're going to, the output's kind of a playbook that's data driven around some of those interventions, what's worked, what hasn't, and we're going to share those with our smaller to medium-sized organizations as well within our community, because many of them don't have the resources or the time to be able to think through some of these things, and we feel strongly that it's important to kind of build the overall ecosystem so that we can share some of those learnings with them so they can continue to build their businesses as well.
Thanks, Simon. And what's interesting from my perspective as a coalition member, sitting underneath all of the projects that we're working on, and I don't want to underestimate the power of it, is the maximum mix of different experiences, different organizations, different sizes, all coming together to really openly share our learnings, what's working for us, what's not, how we ideate together, and how we learn together in a really different way. So it's quite powerful and really interesting. Thank you, Simon. Norah, from your perspective at the University of Waterloo, how has working together allowed us to leverage each other's organizational capabilities and hopefully broadened our perspectives too?
Well, that's a great question, Katie. And I would say that from the University of Waterloo's perspective, I've already mentioned, and it has been mentioned, some of the research we were already doing in this space. So being able to, first of all, contribute that has been really useful to us, because it helps us test our assumptions, see whether or not the research is relevant or valid in a way for the community. So I think that's really been a wonderful experience. We've been able to share some of our insights with others as well. For example, I mentioned, well, it has been mentioned, some of the work that was done on the scorecard, but we've also done some of our own research on, as soon as COVID hit, we had about 8,000 students who were in workplaces, and we've done research on what the response was that made a difference for them in working remotely. So we have that data now from the students' perspective and also from employers' perspective, which we'll be able to add into this additional project that Simon is mentioning. And finally, we've had some research that we've been doing on Gen Z, and what are their values and what are their motivators and what's important around that and how that also plays into the future of work. So my point is that we have been and will do work in this space anyway. And so it's great to be able to contribute it and leverage it and amplify it and learn from others in the coalition.
Thank you. I don't know, we've taken your research in my organization and certainly used it to change the conversation and rethink how we think about onboarding as an example for our future workforce. So thank you for sharing the research. Simon, how does what we're working on individually benefit the whole coalition? Norah started to talk there, but I wonder if you can expand a bit.
Yeah, so I think about it in kind of two ways in terms of how organizations, they're working on their individual projects, but they bring two things to the table that I think are really interesting. So first is knowledge, right? So each of the organizations, because of the diversity of the expertise that they bring, it changes the conversation, right? So you just made you used the example of the Gen Z work that Norah and her team have been working on. Well, that is individual work that they've been doing that could have sat in isolation, right? And of course it wouldn't, because we do talk about these things, but it was in a very focused way to be able to bring some of that research to the betterment of the other organizations and see how it could be applied. So the first one is really the knowledge piece of it, and the second piece is capabilities. I think all of us bring very interesting capabilities to the table that actually add to the overall mix of working together. So I'll give some specific examples. So from a Communitech perspective, one of the things that we bring from a knowledge perspective is kind of the innovation space. So the design thinking space, working with startups and working with enterprise organizations who are thinking through the innovation side of things. We can bring to the table our perspective on how those organizations work together and how they could work together. We also sit at kind of the center of not just the startup and enterprise organizations. We work with academic institutions. We work with our municipalities. So again, the knowledge that we bring is the knowledge of what's important to each of those various sectors. And we can act as a bit of a translator, if you will, to be able to find areas of alignment to bring those groups together to talk about those particular areas from a different perspective. So as I mentioned, we've had a lot of our webinar series that have been doing that, but then also just our general forums. It's been great. We've been working together for, geez, feels like 2020 feels so long, but for over a year now, and we've built some really interesting relationships across the coalition for them to not only share knowledge in a formal setting, but I think there's been a lot of informal sharing of knowledge as well. So that's the first one. The second one, from a capability perspective for Communitech, is just bringing in the ability to help organizations come together to collaborate. That's the capability that we bring around convening and collaborating, and so we've brought that piece of the ingredient to the table. To give you a couple of other examples of organizations within our coalition, one of the organizations is Morneau Chappelle. Morneau Chappelle is a global leader in mental health. So they have a deep expertise in mental health, but they also have a number of capabilities as it relates to mental health in the workplace that they can bring to the table as we think through things like, as we redesign remote and hybrid work. Well, there's going to be, obviously, productivity and mental health are a very important piece of that. And so what types of knowledge and expertise could they bring to the table? Obviously, the academic institutions bring a lot of research capabilities to the table, which is, we want a balance of action and research. So really, each of the organizations bring both knowledge and capabilities, and we really think the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And really, that's the idea of bringing those groups together.
Amazing. Thanks, Simon. If other communities across the globe want to start their own coalition, what advice would you give them? Stephen, I'll start with you because I know you've looked at this issue globally as well. So curious on your thoughts. And then Simon, Norah, I'll turn it to you for your thoughts as well.
Yeah, and I've pitched in on quite a few coalitions, and there's a reason I'm here hanging out with you guys is how well you've done it. The hardest thing to me to try and figure out is how to get diverse stakeholder groups to really not just join, but lean in with their resources and their thinking. I've seen coalitions that, for an example, bring everybody together, but then they're allergic to the profit motive, or they invite educators, but they say, oh, the last thing the future of work needs is more research. So there are these little ways that you can, or some that don't know what a social entrepreneur is, so they're not really bringing in those grassroots folks that are thinking about this differently. So I'm framing the problem, which is the easy part. The hard part is figuring out how all of those motives can work together, because sometimes they do come into conflict. The second thing I'd say is, future of work is at once about, I think, Simon, you were kind of mentioning this in a way, like it's at once about every organization, big and small, and what they're going through, but it's also at the same time macroeconomic. So the other difficult thing is figuring out what's your strategy, what are you going to focus on, and being very sharp and clear about that so that everybody knows what to do. But the last bit of advice that I'll give is think big. No matter what your strategy is and what you focus on, I'll give you a quick example. When it comes to remote work, this distribution of work in a country like Canada is actually, from a macroeconomic perspective, very exciting if we can figure it out. We could really start to employ the rural, the remote, and the hard to employ, who have been frankly left out of the best of the market economy to date. And we might see these big shifts if that happens from urban downtown business centers into suburban and rural. So you're going to see these huge shifts in community and urban design. Like you can see again how it goes from a small topic to a big topic again. And we have to be planful. We have to design these things rather than let them happen organically if we want the optimal result. And
the intentionality and the No, I love the intentionality of it. I love the belief and the hope that you're sharing too, Stephen. I think it's pretty incredible. Simon, thoughts?
Yeah, so Communitech being a bit of the kind of the backbone organization is trying to coordinate these activities. Stephen's 100% right. It's a very challenging endeavor to bring together organizations who have different priorities, different timelines and expectations, different levels of resources that are available to be able to dedicate to this work. You know, in our experience, I guess the advice that I would give is I would think about this as really change management. How do we think through this as a change management process? So the first thing I would say is you need to create a sense of urgency. Now, COVID has, again, given us a bit of a, you know, a lightning rod to think about this. But you do need to create a sense of urgency. You need to start with the why to ensure that organizations and communities or ecosystems understand why they need to act now, why it's not something they can just wait, you know, 3 to 5 years, and what's the competitive imperative in order to think about this topic. So the first one, I think, first step would be around thinking about creating that sense of urgency. The second one is alignment on vision. And we use the word vision, you know, in that grandiose way, but it is really alignment on, if you're going to come together as a group, what is it that you're really trying to solve for, right? At a macro level, and getting to ground on definitions, which is part of the reason why we created the scorecard, because, you know, organizations like the ones who are on this particular panel, they've been thinking about future of work. They've been researching future of work. There's a lot of organizations that are out there that this is not something that's even on their radar. So how do you create a common vision? How do you create a common framework for organizations to understand what we're working on? And then obviously from there, it's really around communicating that vision, making sure that people are aligned. And then I would say you want to think grandiose, because I think that's what we need as a nation and as communities to do. But very, very quickly, the things that you're going to tackle, you're going to have to balance the grandiose with what are the short-term wins, what are the things that really are things to gain momentum, so that the organization sees successes and the value of working together. And maybe I'll just add a couple of like lessons learned, if you will, because we've been at this for a little while. You know, one of the things is if you don't find a way to align the projects and priorities of what you're working on with the organizational priorities first, and then the coalition priorities, it's not going to work, right? The organizations that I have seen lean in the most, they have been able to pinpoint that, you know what, as Norah said, I'm already working on the future of work and preparing students for the future workplace. This is an add-on. This is an accelerant. This is a way for me to learn from others in terms of how do I do it better or do it differently or challenge my perspective. And once you get that mindset, I think that there's the buy-in. The other piece I would say is just organizational buy-in. We're blessed to have some great representatives across our coalition members and some very senior individuals, the folks here as well. But how do the folks here who are representatives on the coalition take the concept of a coalition and take the concept of learning and actually scale that within their organization, so that it's not just dependent on one person who's showing up and saying, this is really neat, that it is something that they can take back and actually scale within the Manulifes, the Deloitte, the University of Waterloo's, the Desire to Learns, whoever they are, scale it so that they see this as part of an organizational priority. So those are some of the challenges I would highlight, and just maybe some of the advice that I would give is around think of this as a broad change management exercise.
And Simon, I just thought I'd pick up, like, I don't know why, but I was thinking of a rephrase, you know, and it would go think big, act small, right? And it's that balance that you're trying to strike, which is so fantastic.
Thank you both. Norah.
Yeah, no, that's great. I would say some suggestions for others that are thinking about this is it is about getting that shared vision and the right people around the table who can both think big but also act. We've all been part of groups, committees, tables, round tables where there's a great deal of wonderful ideas that fly around, but nothing ever moves forward. And so that combination of who's at the table, but also the backbone structure is absolutely critical. So Simon, you mentioned that this is a change management exercise in the sense that you need to create a sense of urgency, and COVID did that, but COVID could also have killed the whole thing, because it could easily have come in and people could have said, forget it, we're overwhelmed with managing with COVID. Why are we spending our time on this? And I think that because the backbone structure was so strong, and because the strategy had been to come at this from the perspective of what do the stakeholders need, how is it going to meet their needs as well as the coalition's needs, and that communication was there, and the iterative nature of how we shifted priorities over the course of the time together, I think has resulted in a lasting coalition that has withstood the challenges of COVID, which is something. So those are some key ingredients that I would add. I also want to say that one of the things that I've appreciated is that we've engaged students in this too. Some co-op students were hired to do some of the research to engage. And that's been really good too, because there's nothing like having students involved in a project to keep you on your toes and make sure that you're thinking about things in a way that includes their view of the world and their lived experience too. That's what I would say.
Thanks so much, Norah. I know when we were doing some of the primary research with our students, I'm sadly in the mid-career cohort, and just hearing with deep empathy and curiosity their values and what they're looking for in work was absolutely incredible and very eye-opening. So I'm thrilled that we had them involved as well. The other piece I'll add for the folks on the phone in terms of lessons learned, and Norah, you and Stephen reiterate this to us all the time, and it served us incredibly well, is to agree on frameworks or agree on research principles upon which we'll build our projects and our thinking. So it just helps to ground us in good, solid thinking and structure as well. So thank you both for contributing that and much more to the coalition. As we start to head to wrap up, I'm not going to invite you to share a piece of advice or a key learning with those folks on the phone. Instead, I'm going to invite you all to leave the audience with a question you'd like them to think about or to ask as they head back into their daily lives. Norah, I'll start with you.
Thanks very much. And, considering that the audience, I imagine, is predominantly, one would think, coming from the FinTech industry, the question I would leave is, what strategies have you put into place, either with your local higher education providers or with others, to foster and recruit and attract and consider bringing in young talent that can be well prepared to contribute to the FinTech industry and to help keep that industry thriving?
Oh, I love that question. Stephen.
What are the scenarios that you should be thinking? Like, try and pick 3 scenarios for the future that might be wildly different or at least substantially different that you need to prepare for 5 years down the road. And most importantly, how are the humans in your business and in your ecosystem going to be impacted? These are sort of the conditions for workforce strategy, as I said earlier. And, the other thing I'd add to why that's an important question, it might seem like, if you're in FinTech, isn't this about technology? I do think that sustainable technological advantage is now in the hands of very, very few. And for those that have it, it doesn't sustain for that long. So the last bastion of strategic advantage is the human. And that's why I think that's an important question.
I like that one too. Simon, hard act to follow these two. What are you going to say, buddy?
Yeah, I know. I don't know. I don't really know what to say. No, I think that the question I get people to think about and ask themselves is, given what we've talked about today, is this something that you think your organization can tackle on its own? And as we think about, the talent landscape, whether it be FinTech, whether it be our region and Waterloo region, Ontario, Canada, et cetera, are we big enough as a nation to be able to compete for the global talent that we need in order to sustain our organizations, in order to sustain our communities, and in order to sustain Canada as a leader in innovation and technology. And that's where every country is going. So when I think about it, the thing I'd ask yourselves is, A, are you even starting to think about what this means from a talent attraction standpoint? But if you are, does it make sense for you to work on this on your own, given the system-wide nature of this challenge? Or is it better for you to work with others in a diverse group to be able to understand what are some of the common challenges, learn from others, in the right situations where you have common priorities, collaborate with each other? And, I think about, kind of the vision for our coalition we started here in the community. I'd love for other communities and other ecosystems in Canada to adopt a similar model where they're collaborating. And really why I want that is because I know there's things happening in other communities across Canada that we could learn from, and that it would benefit our organizations, our academic institutions, et cetera, if we found a way to be able to take those learnings and scale those across. So, I get you to think about, is this something you want to solve on your own, or is this something that you might be best off to collaborate on? And I'll leave you with kind of the analogy I love to use around collaboration, which is Peloton racing. So folks who have raced on Peloton bikes, you know, you've got individuals, you've got teams who are entering a race. And for, you know, I don't know what the percentage is, but I'll say it's 95% of the race. You know, what they do is those racers will work together, draft each other. Some might take a lead for a period of time. Some might hang back. Others will then take the lead, and some others will hang back. And they are racing together for the first 95%. They still need to compete on their own for talent, in this analogy, for the last 5%. But what they've done is they've raised the bar by collaborating in the first 95%, and they're only competing on the last 5%. And so that's the thing I would leave as a bit of a takeaway for people to think about is this something that you want to tackle on your own, or is this something that you are best to tackle within your community or across other ecosystems to really bring this to life?
That's amazing. Thank you all. I think you've left the audience, and certainly me too, with some great questions to think about. There's 4 things or 4 themes that came through all of your answers today that really stuck with me. One, the power of collaboration. And Simon, you know, I don't think I could have said it any better myself in terms of the metaphor. I think it was absolutely perfect. We also talked a lot about skills and the skills we'll need for the future and how we predict that and how we work together to do that. And then hand in hand with that, the notion of lifelong learning. It will never, ever stop. And what is the best way for us to learn in the future? The other element is technology and humans working together, but really with a focus on a human-centric future where we rethink jobs, we rethink how teams come together and what work might actually look like, and the whole notion of complex systems across the globe. So I think you've given us all very much to think about, a lot to believe in, if I do dare say that as well. So thank you very much for joining us today. Audience, thanks for joining us. The next up is a discussion presented by the Toronto Finance International's Aspire program on developing next-gen talent in financial services. So in just a few minutes, hope you'll join us there too. Thank you.